So, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein, as always. I'm so happy to be here with you. Tonight, I want to talk about something that you may not have put together before, or maybe you did, I hadn't. And it was the physical and 5 mental health benefits, at least, of doing a fasting mimicking diet or doing some sort of time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. I know those are things that are very trendy today. A lot of well-known health professionals and influencers talk about that. Everyone from Dr. Mindy Pelz, who has Fast Like a Girl, and other related books out there. Lots and lots of people. And there's good reason, right? Because we know that restricting when we eat and sometimes how much we eat can have health benefits, but it's challenging. There are people who love it. I really don't think that's the majority of people. I think that fasting challenges us, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about why it might be worth adding fasting to your repertoire, especially like me, if you've been dealing with long COVID. Um, I find that doing a fasting mimicking diet can be very helpful for a lot of my symptoms. But I'll go over a little bit about the data that talks about how fasting can benefit from you. And then I just kind of want to link that to some of the ways it can help the way we approach our lives, the way we think about ourselves, and even the way we handle distress, right? By the end of this episode, you'll say, okay, now, yeah, that makes sense. So um, I'm right now on day 3 of Prolon, which is a type of fasting mimicking diet where they send you all the food and it's calorie restricted, but it kind of tricks your body into thinking that you're fasting without food. Now, this was developed by Dr. Valter Longo and his colleagues at the University of Southern California. I'll tell you, he is a professor of gerontology and biological sciences, and he's the director of the Longevity Institute at USC. And this is somebody who spent decades doing a lot of research in this area, first with animals and then with humans. And there are a number of health benefits. The reason I believe that the team came up with a fasting mimicking diet, literally, you're not exactly fasting because you are consuming some food, um, is because it is so hard. And going without food, or like some people do, without food and water for a few days, can place a lot of stress on the system. And some of you right now may be saying, well, yeah, of course I do this anyway, and I know this. Okay. and and there's more of you now than ever. But like many people, I too, have a hard time not having the food I want or as much food as I want. I don't like feeling hungry. This is probably the 5th time I've done this. And again, it's 5 days. Um, over the course of maybe 3 years. And I'm doing it for specific reasons. Again, there are documented physical health benefits. I'll tell you about them in a moment. Um, Certainly, there are other reasons that you might benefit from doing this, especially now. And you're probably saying, look, lady, we're in, you know, only a little bit, a few weeks out from a very contentious election. Prices for normal things are high. It's winter in much of the United States, or not winter, but it's feeling like it. Um, there's a lot going on, and we all have our normal daily things to do. It's hard to imagine that feeling kind of hungry for a few days would enable you to feel better in some way, but I'm going to tell you how. Yeah, like as I mentioned, some people know, some people don't, that I've been dealing with long COVID, honestly, since I'm going to say early 2020 or maybe May 2020. Everything from brain fog to fatigue, my sense of smell, which used to be off the charts, which sometimes isn't such a good thing, is greatly diminished. And there was a long time where I not only had no sense of smell, but I had what I'm going to describe as these olfactory hallucinations almost. So I would smell things that weren't there and they were unpleasant, like poop or burnt toast. And this is something that you probably see a lot of social media posts on. If you go looking for long COVID information, there's a lot there. I've lost a ton of hair. Um, the fatigue can be overwhelming sometimes still. Um, what else? Lots of stuff. Heart palpitations, and I've seen a cardiologist. Please know that I'm not telling anybody, by the way, to do a fast without talking to your doctor. You should. And you should make sure you're in good enough health to do it and that you understand what you're getting into. But the reason I started doing this is because, it's not only that I've got these long COVID symptoms, I've had autoimmune stuff on and off for a lot of my life. I don't want to go into detail about that, but a lot of times I feel like I'm using a ton of energy to get anything done, even though I look relatively normal. So I really wanted to find something to help me kind of reset. And a fast can help you do that in a lot of ways, which I'll describe in more detail in a moment. But one thing I've noticed is that I've experienced benefits from fasting beyond what they've described in the research. And there's quite a lot of research about this. It's not just something some guy made up and you should just try it because he thinks it's good. There's a lot of research supporting the use actually of this particular diet, which I am not selling you, disclaimer, but I'm telling you about because it's what I'm using. But what I've known is that each time I do this, I feel like my memory improves a bit, my concentration improves a bit. My sense of smell comes back a little bit more. I do notice that sometimes I feel like I have a little more hair regrowth. Hair loss is actually a very common long COVID symptom. So, I can observe the benefits and I can observe them pretty quickly for me. Just, the first year when I had noticed really bad long COVID symptoms, it was hard to even read. And I'm somebody who is a really avid reader. So the inability to concentrate on a book might sound like not a big deal to a lot of people, but it was gut wrenching. I just felt like I didn't know or didn't recognize myself. And it felt a little frightening, I have to be honest. Please know there's hope. But doing something as simple as resetting, and there are reasons for this, helped improve my concentration and energy levels in addition to other things. Now, again, I said this particular one that I'm doing, you should ask your doctor about it if you think you might want to do it, but it's been found to reverse biological age from one 5-day fast, or I'm sorry, one cycle. Their idea of a cycle is doing a 5-day fasting mimicking diet once a month for 3 consecutive months. But their data showed that that could reverse your biological age score by 2.5 years. Now, that might not sound like a lot, especially if you're younger, but if you're feeling like you're aging faster than you want to be, that could be important. I want to give this context because if you were to do 3 cycles of this 5-day fasting mimicking diet, remember you're eating something, not nothing. If you did that every year, 3 cycles, so 3 months where you did 5 days of a fasting mimicking plan, you could potentially lower your biological age score by up to 11 years if you did that for 20 years. So every year, 3 rounds of fasting for 20 years. So they were saying for people between the ages of 50 and 70. So even if you're 50 years old now, it might be worth considering doing something like this if you feel like your health isn't quite what you would like it to be. And you might feel great and not need to do this. And I think you are the best judge of knowing whether this is something you want to explore. I'm just telling you about what the data says and my experience. Some of the other research out of Dr. Longo's lab, though, found that prolonged fasting, so normally for 72 hours or more, so 3 days or more without food, without any food, the research shows that that triggers cellular repair and rejuvenation. And that is known formally as autophagy. And again, if you've listened to Dr. Mindy Pelz, you have heard her use that term and others as well. So autophagy is your body's system for recycling old and worn out cellular components into newer parts so they function like younger and more efficient versions of themselves. And that's actually right from the Prolon summary of the research. But it's this process of autophagy, of the cellular cleanout, is so important to health span and longevity that research on this subject was awarded the 2016 Nobel Prize in Medicine. That's really significant. That's not something even scores of amazing researchers will ever achieve. So it tells you that there's more to look into with this. It's worth looking in to see if it might be for you, if it's something you're interested in. Um, Another thing they found with their research is that, unlike with regular fasting with no food, you can experience fat loss without losing muscle. And you really want to preserve muscle as we get older. It just protects you from injuries. It enables you to do the things you want to do. You all know that. Other things they found were that 20 days of Prolon. So I'm assuming they mean 4 consecutive cycles, once a month, so 4 months. That's as effective as being on the Mediterranean diet for 120 days for heart health benefits. I didn't say that very well, but you know what I mean. So what they're saying is you don't have to be doing a fasting mimicking diet all that long to see the same benefits you would if you were doing a Mediterranean diet. And what they did find, and what I'll tell you is my experience and the experience of probably a lot of other people, is that doing something like this does reduce food cravings and sugar cravings. I'm not actually a huge sugar craver. I know that's weird, but of course, like most people, there are certain foods I crave more than others at different times. Um, so there are plenty of reasons physically to do something like this. But there are other benefits that go even beyond what they talk about in their research. And those are ones I wanted to share with you because I have to tell you, this being my 5th time, it's a bit of a different experience. I'm not as distressed doing it. Because if you're used to eating normally and kind of freely, free range eating, just kind of eating whenever you kind of feel like you're hungry, like you pack a snack. You're going to be in the car for a long drive, you have something, or you are going about your day and you have something at home, or you stop off somewhere and you're used to not having to tolerate feelings of hunger or cravings for very long. We're very fortunate in the industrialized world to be able to kind of eat when we want and have a lot of choices, including a lot that aren't great for us, but are, very rewarding in terms of how our brain experiences these foods, at least in the short term. But one benefit that I've observed is that doing this again for the 5th time is it's helping me to cultivate more patience. Personally, I think generally around the world and in the United States, patience is in too short a supply, generally. I think we've become a culture where we have a hard time waiting for things or delaying gratification. And if you don't believe me, just notice when somebody is, in the express line at the supermarket with twice the amount of items that they should have. Or there's some holdup because somebody's got to check a price on something. And you will see how grown people will lose their marbles over having to wait. And I know sometimes we all have things we need to get to, but honestly, look at the people who drive through your neighborhood, like they're going to put out a 4-alarm fire, or like they've got an organ in a cooler and they're rushing to a transplant operation. It's usually not the case. So patience is something in short supply, and I think it's really vital. It's vital to help us dialogue with each other better. It's vital to deal with life's normal inconveniences. It's important to help us deal with things that are hard to wait for. You took an exam and you've got to wait to find out how you did. That's hard for most people. Or you went to the doctor and you had some testing done and now you've got to wait for the results. That can be excruciating for people. and I'm sure you could think of a million other examples, but I really want to break this fast sometimes, probably like 20 times during this 5-day fast. I'll think, God, I really just would love to eat a piece of bread, or I'm feeling slightly headachy, which, by the way, is mild and transient, but it's hard to be patient. Sometimes 5 days, which really isn't that long, can feel like 2 months. And remember, I'm eating something. There are people who do water fasts for 5 days. I'm just not one of them. I don't think I'll become one of them, but who knows? But it's not a lifetime, right? One thing I'll notice, I'll have cravings like for fresh food. That's something that's a little challenging because even though the food is very tasty, I'll crave like a salad or, a fresh vegetable, or I'm not even a fruit person, but a piece of fruit, even things that are alive. And it can be difficult to ride that out. I think I've only broken this fast once, where I've broken it early. Like that night, I had something because I thought I can't do it, but I did most of it. Um, One thing it's helped me to remember is the big picture and the reason why. And the reason why is I always feel better and I believe that I am healthier and doing something important for myself. And I feel like a 5-day chunk out of my year, maybe, or once every 3 months, or 4 months, or 6 months, is worth the benefits that I've observed. I mean, I was really dragging through a lot of the last few years. And again, I think, a lot of people have a lot of things going on for them where they look fairly normal. So no one would think that they're not feeling great or believe them if they told them. So keeping sight of the big picture and cultivating patience through doing this, because remember, I've done it before, so I know that it's doable. I think that's helping me in other areas of my life, and I imagine it could help you as well. A second thing, I would say number two, that I feel like this process is helping me with is gratitude. Gratitude is really hard when things aren't ideal. Some people are just grateful by nature. Some people are grateful because they have trained themselves to recognize even the little things in their lives that are wonderful and that not everybody has. There are people, though, who struggle with gratitude. It's not their natural kind of setting. Gratitude, we know, has a ton of benefits. There's research on gratitude. And any moment is better if we can be grateful for something in it. I'm grateful that I think the food on this particular program tastes amazing. It's true. And even though I might want more of it, I do. I'm grateful for the taste of the food and the fact that this process, again, makes me feel more mindful. I'm grateful that I can access this food. I'm aware that not everybody can just access a 5-day prepackaged fast. And I'm grateful for a lot of other things. When you start being grateful for one thing and then another thing, it's interesting how much more easily we can notice other things to be grateful for. Okay, the third thing, mindfulness. Now, please know that I am aware that I have mentioned mindfulness up, down, and sideways in this podcast, and that you now cannot, again, as I've said probably recently, you can't throw a pebble without hitting 1,000 people talking about mindfulness. And sometimes it can seem very preachy or very cloaked in New Age terminology, or it can seem very kind of blah, blah, blah mindfulness. And, obviously, most people know, I think, that there are decades of research showing all kinds of benefits from mindfulness. So I won't go into that here. But it is hard to be mindful when we are resisting something, right? The process of mindfulness helps us to observe our thoughts and feelings without getting caught up in them and identifying with them. But it's harder when we've got noise in our bodies and minds. And what I mean by that is hunger. Hunger for us, we're all trained to think of hunger as an alarm. And there are good reasons for that, right? It's important to our survival as a species that we eat properly. We eat enough, that we don't go on and on and on and on without eating. Um, but the problem is the feeling of hunger can trigger such anxiety or fear or alarm in so many of us that we feel like we have to silence that alarm immediately. And that's not exactly true. Most of the time, it's not true. Again, if you're somebody who has a blood sugar issue or some other medical issue where you actually have to pay more attention to that alarm, obviously, please do that. But I'm talking about for most people, and especially for people who seem medically clear to do something like this, it's okay for us to notice the wanting, the hunger that is actual hunger, the hunger that is trying to stifle an emotion, the hunger that is trying to, the sensation we think of as hunger, but it's really that we're tired and we want something to wake us up. And eating something or drinking something can be stimulating, even if it's not a stimulating substance in and of itself. How many of you, I know I do this, have coffee and, you assume that if you're going to meet somebody for coffee or tea, you're also going to have a snack. And again, I'm not judging. I think that's one of life's little and meaningful pleasures, and I really enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with enjoying that. But it's when we get so automatic about our eating and drinking that not only does it kind of lose its meaning, but we tend to overconsume even when it's not great for us. Yeah, so there are a lot of people too, by the way, that it's not just the normal, oh, I don't like being hungry feeling. That's one type of alarm. But for a lot of people, there are a lot of issues around food, either because it was scarce or because, you know, maybe somebody else in your family experienced food insecurity. And that can generate an alarm that feels like an existential alarm. So please know that I'm aware of that. The first few times that you do something like this, if you're prone to that level of alarm, this will be harder. And you might want to do that with the support of your therapist. Um, but, you know, you get used to, honestly, by the time you do something like this fasting mimicking diet, you can tolerate knowing that your body is used to having more than a small bowl of soup and a few olives or a few kale crackers. But we can ride out that type of distress and we can become more mindful of the food in front of us, not only during the fast and decatastrophize, right? Calm down that alarm, but more mindful of what we eat and what we drink. And when we do have, food and when we don't, from doing this process. And remember, mindfulness is an essential tool for tolerating life's other distressing things. Again, I'm being mindful of the fact that whether you won or whether you didn't, whether you feel your person won or didn't, I feel the level of national distress in November 2024 as I'm sitting recording this podcast on something completely different. And anything in our lives can be distressing. So indirectly, this is a great tool for enhancing your mindfulness practice. Yeah, I mean, you all know that. Normally, a lot of us, myself included, we're eating, we're busy, we're multitasking, we don't even taste the food. So it's worth kind of resetting. And here's an aside about food and what it does for people, because, we as a society, and there are biological reasons for this, but we use food to create specific feelings of satisfaction, of joy, and it's beyond just the emotional. Your brain does light up saying you've got a reward when we eat certain foods, right? Which you probably won't be having on this particular plan, but it's okay. We'll get through it together. But, you know, people use food to stimulate themselves in all kinds of ways, right? And I've just mentioned a few: keeping yourself awake, squashing feelings, creating feelings. Um, I was telling my husband the other day, when I was a graduate student, I would have, if I had a paper that was going to be stressful to write or really long and I wasn't going to get a lot of sleep, or when I was writing my doctoral dissertation, and a friend of mine and I remember talking about this a lot. She and I would both have like a little bowl or not little bowl of dry cereal or popcorn next to us so that we could get through, 4 hours of writing something that day. And, you know, some of you will get this and some of you won't, but that automatic kind of motion and the sensory experience, not just the taste, whether it's salty or sweet or whatever, but the chewing, that can be a type of stimulation, like stimming. If you have a brain that is neurodivergent, people talk about stimming and all the things people do to kind of keep themselves focused or keep themselves alert or awake. That's all of us to some degree. So now, if you're doing whatever you're doing this week and you're doing this fast, that tool, right? I'm going to call it a tool and not a crutch, because everything is a tool potentially, is not available to you. Doing something like this can help you to breathe through and get through, again, hard things without that particular tool. Okay, number 4, I think it's important to help people decouple their identity from eating and drinking. Now, some of you might be thinking, like, what is she talking about? But in a moment, you'll understand what I mean, because everybody comes from a culture. It could be a blended culture. It could be a culture that is very meaningful to you. Not, it could be just your particular family culture, um, rather than your ethnic culture or culture of origin or whatever. But food and drink have very significant importance across cultures. And in families, let me tell you something. Even if your family was very, had, I'm going to say, unhealthy attitudes towards food, where they were always monitoring everybody's food and trying to make sure nobody ate too much and nobody got fat, because that is a particular family culture around food as well. And it is unhealthy. It's as unhealthy in a different way as only eating donuts. And I'm going to tell you, anybody who thinks that's not true, by the way, it is. Because it's a type of identity that develops around rules about what's okay and what isn't with regard to eating and drinking. So whether it's that your meals have to be 2 hours because everybody's laughing and enjoying themselves, and that's wonderful, and it's a way to come together and have community, but you can wind up eating and drinking way too much and then feel exhausted and then have something else to kind of wake up or whatever. That's not ideal. But it's also not great to have an identity around we're virtuous because we, you know, shun eating beyond what we need to survive, or, eating is all planned around fitting into a certain size jeans that maybe you wouldn't naturally fit into. That's not great either. And doing something like this fast, which, by the way, is contraindicated for people who have an active eating disorder or a significant history of eating disorders, this might not be for you, or it won't be for you now. But being mindful around eating will. But for most people who don't have a clinical issue, a clinically significant issue around food, doing something like this type of fast can help you identify what it is about your own particular associations with food are worth keeping and bring you joy and keep you healthy, which ones will be reserved for holidays and special occasions, and maybe your normal diet will be a little bit different because you might need something different for your ideal health. Which things you want to keep and which things you want to put in certain categories or at certain times, and which things you kind of want to find a new or updated version of that better suits the person you are now and who you'd like to be. I know that was long-winded, but food is such a part of our social world. And, you know, our social identity, our cultural identities do affect how we view what we need, what's important to us. Um, all kinds of things. And it could be something as simple as going out for tea and a biscuit or going to wine tasting with friends or having beers while you watch the game. Those are all somewhat culturally bound. And again, it could just be your friend group, but that forms its own culture. It forms our ideas about food and our identity in relation to it. And when I say food, I mean food and beverages, alcoholic or not. But you can decouple that if you decide to. So I'm going to tell you, I have a friend whose mother is in her early 80s now. And certainly she loves holiday get-togethers with family and she likes a good meal. It's, if she would like to have a cookie with her tea, why not? But every outing that she has now is not around food. She takes thoughtful care of her health. So she actually meets up with people if the weather permits, and they go for a walk in a local park and spend a half hour chatting and catching up, much as one would over lunch or dinner or coffee or whatever. And I actually met up with her a few years ago now, and we walked, and it was great. And it was interesting. There was no food and there was no coffee, and it was perfectly great. So expanding who we are and our relationship to food so that the food can be still important, but something that isn't automatic and doesn't define us in a rigid way can be really helpful. Decoupling some of the ideas we have about food with our identity. And then perhaps number 5, doing a fast like this decreases your physical dependency on certain foods and your psychological dependency on them. I'm going to give you an example. It is very easy for me, especially with this fatigue, to get up to 4 cups of coffee in a day. I think my ideal amount of caffeine, honestly, from previous experience, is probably half a cup. But it's 2 things at work here. One, I'm trying to get things done and manage my fatigue, and I'm doing that chemically, admitting it. But I'm also, you know, enjoying having that coffee. It's become kind of a little bit like a crutch. It is a tool that I use more than I need to, but it feels like I need to. So there is now not only a psychological dependency on caffeine for me, but it's certainly a physical dependency. I'm not having coffee right now, by the way. I'm having extraordinarily dilute broth. I don't even think you could call it that. Um, Everything can create a physical dependency. If you see somebody who has sweets after dinner or, the midday cookie or candy bar or whatever, and they're used to it, it can be very difficult to not have that for 5 days. And again, there's an emotional connection to that because it's something we look forward to. It's part of our routine. Our brains are looking for it. We're getting that lift to our blood sugar. We're feeling rewarded. For me, that cup of coffee is a reward. Sometimes it's a guilty pleasure if it's, too late in the day. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not somebody who can sleep if I have a 4 o'clock cup of coffee. I might do it once in a while, but generally I shouldn't. Doing something like this fast, you're permitted up to like a cup of coffee in the morning. That's hard. But I have to be honest, even if I get a few extra weeks out of sticking with that, I feel like I'm doing something good for myself. But I would have a harder time doing that now just to do it, just being honest. Um, you know, and when we talk about addiction, obviously alcohol and other substances, that's what we normally think of. And no, you cannot have alcohol while you're doing this. So if you have a glass of wine with dinner every night, you might miss it. I don't think you need it while you're eating like this, because I think actually this type of eating pattern decreases your cravings for a lot of things just because the food is different. When we need something and it causes pain not to have it, you can start to think of that as a dependency. And I think most of us would feel better about how we move through the world if things feel more like we get to choose them and appreciate them with gratitude, mindfully, rather than having that thing keep choosing us. So that's it, really. The podcast on what I'm learning from a fasting mimicking diet and how I really do think it can help us with the mission of this podcast to feel better, do better, and live better overall. So I'm very interested in what you think. I hope you are enjoying what I'm sharing. And if there's something else you'd like me to share, please let me know. Leave me a comment, share, follow the podcast. Let me know what you think. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you want more of. And just a quick heads up, in the upcoming weeks, I will be having episodes on other interesting topics. One by a noted researcher in long COVID who's going to talk very knowledgeably about that and how we can feel better. I'm going to have an integrative vet on the show, and she's going to share all kinds of different options for managing your pet's health, using some natural preparations and how these may or may not work with some of the medication options and so forth. So I'm really excited to get into that. I'm going to be interviewing two research psychologists on how hypnosis can help us access mystical states. But as always, thank you so much for joining me. I love being here for you. And until next time, as always, be well.